I actually wear two hats in public. I will talk about two hats. I actually wear two hats in public. On the one hand, I'm the author of about a dozen books on linguistic and historical matters. I'm the author of primarily I'm a linguist, I'm the author of an etymological dictionary of the Turkish language. That was followed by a number of both popular and theoretical works, the common theme of which is a kind of archaeology of the contemporary Turkish culture, studying the underlying assumptions and the cultural taboos and the cultural underpinnings of modern Turkish language, modern Turkish public policy, modern Turkish political theory. I have a book of a systematic analytical critique of the founding myths of the Turkish Republic. It's called the Wrong Republic. And in recent years, in the last couple of years, I've been increasingly involved in a systematic study of the founding myths of the Islamic religion, the intellectual underpinnings of the Islamic religion. These are obviously highly controversial topics, and especially the fact that an Armenian of liberal and Western sort of outlook, dealing with these subjects which are considered the sacrosanct taboo topics of Turkish culture, is something that the Turkish public is not used to. My second hat, the other hat for which I'm well known in this country, is that about 22 years ago, I settled in an historic village in the Aegean hills of Western Turkey, an old Greek village, as a matter of fact, the village where the novelist Dido Sotiriou was born, as a matter of fact. It used to be called Kirkince under the Greeks. It's now called Şirince. This was a village whose Greek population left in 1923 and was resettled with Turkish immigrants from Macedonia. And it was a dying village. It was a village which was economically no longer viable. It kept its historic architecture more or less intact. We fell in love with this village with my wife 20-something years ago. Settled there and started renovating some of the old houses. Now, this wasn't just any sort of renovation. We tried to do something very specific. We tried to revive, to maintain the spirit of the village, to revitalize the spirit of the village, and to build old houses exactly the way they were built 100 years ago, using the same materials, the same cultures, the same proportions, the same style, the same lifestyle. The same lifestyle. I actually spent a lot of time studying the old architecture. Although I'm not an architect myself, I sort of became by default, by accident, I became an architect. I studied the techniques, the materials, the natural sources of materials. I wrote several booklets about how to renovate old houses in an old Greek village. The houses were considered masterpieces by some people, and decided to turn some of them into a sort of an accommodation, a touristic establishment. Now we own a so-called hotel, which consists of about 20 buildings in the village of Şirince. And then the project kept developing. Together with a friend of mine who is a well-known mathematician, we established a mathematics summer school in Şirince, which has grown into a village of its own with about 20 or so buildings. It turned into a major campus. This was followed by a school of philosophy, it was followed by a school of theater, and that is quickly developing into a sort of an alternative university in a rural setting, which I think is an extremely exciting and interesting project, a path-breaking project for for the culture in Turkey. So in these two fields, first the revival of an historic village as a cultural and touristic monument. That was one field in which I'm active. And on the other hand, studying the underlying assumptions of modern Turkish culture is a field in which I write frequently. I write in the newspapers. My blog has become very popular. And of course, both of these activities, being being an Armenian, therefore a member of a religious and cultural minority in this country, and secondly, being something extremely unusual, being an Armenian who is outspoken and is not afraid to speak out his mind, that has a strongly critical language, I managed to make a lot of enemies. The enemies almost entirely, almost exclusively among the government bureaucracy. In other words, with the Turkish public, I don't seem to have any serious problem. I have a wide segment of the population, of the Turkish public, on the right and the left, on the Islamic side as well as the socialist side. There are lots of people who find what I'm doing a valuable public activity. However, the local bureaucrats, the local governors, the local police chiefs, the local judges do not think so. They find it extremely disturbing that so-called an outsider, I use this as in quotation marks, a non-Turk, a non-Muslim has the temerity, has the shamelessness, as a matter of fact, of dealing with such subjects, of trying to become a full-scale citizen of this country. And I think that the key theoretical problem, the key problem, is exactly in that field. A lot of people ask me, why are you a fool? Why are you spending so much labor and are you doing so much work, both in architectural terms and also in intellectual terms? I mean, what is it to you? What do you care? I suppose when I ask myself, I think there's a strong element of this, which I find among other members of the minorities in this country, among Armenians especially, is that we are really trying to become full-fledged citizens of this country. You have to somehow prove that you are a citizen, that you are doing something for the public. You have an interest in the public wealth, in the public affairs of this country, and you have the right to be interested in these things. And being considered outsiders, being less than citizens in Turkey, you have to work double, you have to work twice as much to be able to show to people that actually we are valuable citizens of this country. This is really, I think, the underlying psychological motive of what I'm doing and what several other Armenians as well as Greeks in this country are doing. There's a strange imbalance. The Armenians in this country are a tiny minority, a very small minority, but somehow some of the most intelligent, some of the most interesting and honest and original thinkers and public figures in this country happen to be Armenians. I mean, there's something that deserves to be explained there. That's a factor. On the other hand, the Turkish government, since the founding of the Republic, or perhaps since before then, is based very much on a notion of ethnic as well as religious solidarity. We are the Turks, we own this country, is the basic premise of the Turkish public speech. And these people, we are surrounded by enemies. The Greeks, the Russians, the Armenians, the others, the communists, they are all out there. They are the enemies of the Turkish state. And therefore they do not have the right to be considered equal and full citizens. A notion of a modern citizenship, the notion that every citizen in this country has equal and fundamental rights, is an idea that a majority of the Turkish official opinion finds difficult to deal with. And for that reason, when some Armenian of suspect views and critical ideas starts turning into a celebrity, who starts doing things which are beyond his accepted station, they become extremely suspicious and alarmed, and they can't figure out what the hell is this man trying to do, and they try to stop you. In both fields, in other words, both in the village of Şirince, which used to be effectively an abandoned village where everybody was expecting all the old houses to fall down and to disappear. And when my wife and myself, my wife is Turkish, by the way, my wife and myself made a big effort to publicize Şirince and to turn it into, to create a public awareness of its historical value. And we were very instrumental in trying to protect the architectural legacy of the village. They said, "Ooh, what you are doing is against the law. There are all these arcane details of the laws which nobody normally cares about, but when you, Mr. Nişanyan, try to build things in Şirince, you have to, that's no-no, you have to be more respectful of the laws in this country." In 15 years, they opened over 40 court cases, criminal cases against me. I went to jail once in the year 2001 for 10 months for unpermitted construction of a village house in my own property in the village. That helped me become quite a celebrity throughout the country. And for a while, from the year 2002 until 2008, 2009, there was very little obstruction from the official side. However, when I started writing in the daily press in the year 2008, when I started attacking some of the most sensitive issues of Turkish public debate in the year 2009, 2010, all of a sudden they remembered that, this man is building lots of houses, and in every house there's some little infraction that they have to deal with. So once again there was a second round of 19 court cases, criminal cases, for illegal construction, for improper permits, for all sorts of details of construction. Every single one of these, all 19 cases, ended up with convictions, prison terms, in the local court. And I ended up receiving 24 plus or 25 years of prison terms for renovating old houses in the village of Şirince, which is actually, I think, a world record. It's certainly a Turkish record. Everybody seems to realize that all these sentences are for being an unruly person, for being somebody, an Armenian, who steps out of his appointed role in society and tries to accomplish something. Everybody seems to realize that what we are doing in the village, with the, both with the mathematics village, with the academic institutions, with the revitalization of the historic legacy of the village, what we are doing is something that has to be a model for all of Turkey. In other words, this, it's almost a model case of sustainable tourism and sustainable cultural revival. However, there are all the little details of the law, which traditionally no one ever in this country cares about. But when it comes to Mr. Nişanyan doing this and that, they are very sufficient. They are very useful pretexts for putting him down. So eventually, of these 24 years of jail sentences, some of them were somehow or other eliminated, but they ended up approving 4 years in jail, and now I'm going to serve at least 2, possibly 4 years, between 2 and 4 years in jail for actually building a 60 square meter stone cottage in a village, in a property belonging to myself in the village. My critique of Islamic and nationalistic concepts in Turkey also caused a huge furore, a big public debate. And last year I was condemned to a year and 3 months in jail for allegedly insulting the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, which is, I think, it's absurd, it's nonsense. It was merely a critical sentence in actually a very academic type of article, in which I basically argued that people have the full right, citizens of Turkey have the right, the basic human right, the legal right, to consider the message of Mr. Muhammad to be baloney. In other words, nonsense. You don't have to believe in that stuff. This was considered insulting, and under the personal orders of Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan, several prosecutors across the country took it upon themselves to take me to court, and I was condemned to a year and 3 months in jail. That case is still pending at the higher court, at the Court of Appeals. But if the Court of Appeals doesn't overturn that verdict, I will also serve a year and 3 months in jail, in addition to my other infractions. I was born in Istanbul. I'm a Constantinopolitan. I come from an old Armenian family of Istanbul. In other words, my grandparents, my great-grandparents were also quite public figures. I studied in the United States. I went to Yale, where I studied philosophy, and then Columbia University, where I studied political science. However, then I became almost by default a linguist. And for many years I taught at a university in Istanbul history of Turkish language and etymology of Turkish language. I live in this village, which is a very idyllic, rural, mountain village. I've been living there for more than 20 years now. And that's where I am. Yeah. I have 5 children.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. Mr. Nişanyan, I want to ask you, what do you think about the minorities problems in Turkey, and what do you think about the violations of human rights in respect to minorities?
Obviously, the 20th century history of Turkey is a shameful one with respect to the treatment of especially the non-Muslim minorities, but also the non-Turkish but Muslim minorities of this country. This country experienced the first major genocide of the 20th century, the expulsion of the almost 2 million Greek citizens of the country, the repression of the Kurds, and so on and so forth. So there is this huge background of violence against minorities, of a national identity built on violence, built on the eradication of the non-Turkish and non-Muslim history of this country. This, I think, is largely in the past. In other words, the human rights violations, such as they exist now, compared to what went on until about 20 years ago, there has been a huge improvement. In other words, there aren't any direct attacks. There aren't any explicit demonization of the minorities in this country anymore. I mean, one has to admit this. Turkey has gone a long way over the last 20 years. And obviously the sociological development of the country, the more sophisticated, more urban population of the country now, and also the fact that the long process of joining or trying to join the European Union has also been has had a beneficial effect on this country. However, certain things remain. And I tried to touch on this a minute ago. The notion of a modern citizenship, rights-based citizenship, the notion that every citizen in this country has certain basic rights, certain basic legal rights, just for the fact of being a citizen. This notion hasn't really fully sunk into this country. This country is still uncomfortable with that idea. For a very long time, this country was built on the notion that a certain ethnic group, a certain religious and ethnic group, is the dominant element. They own the country, and they have the prerogative, the right to declare certain groups, certain members of the society as extra-legal, as enemies, public enemies, as less than citizens. The concept of citizenship is very much problematic in Turkey. It's getting better. There's no question that it's getting better. But still, especially the bureaucracy, especially the government apparatus, is uncomfortable with the notion of citizenship. And the human rights violations that exist in Turkey are very much a result of this basic failure to understand that, well, this man might be a Kurd, this man might be a non-Muslim, this man might be a homosexual, a gay person, this person could be a woman, a member of the non-Orthodox sects of Islam, the Alevis, and nevertheless they have just as much rights in expressing themselves, of holding their own opinions, and speaking out fully and without fear, and of defending their rights in this country as full and equal citizens. This notion takes a very long time, a ridiculously long time, to sink in to the consciousness of the rulers of Turkey. That is the basic problem. When I became prominent, both as the spokesman and the leader of the village of Şirince, and of an intellectual spokesman for certain ideas, the reaction that I received from government representatives wasn't so much hostility directly as incomprehension. They don't understand what's going on. They find this extremely disturbing, and they come tell me, look, Mr. Nişanyan, we actually, why don't you just shut up? And what's wrong with you? And we tolerate you. We are not kicking you out of this country. Islam is a religion of tolerance. This is, you know, the classical cliche. Now, we tolerate you, so why don't you just shut up? This is the attitude. Mm. Now, and if you refuse to shut up, if you insist on your rights, and if you insist on saying that, look, I mean, these are my opinions, and I hold a right to contribute to the public debate in this country, that's when they start turning hostile. Mm. That's when it starts, the battle escalates, and eventually they find no other way of getting out of this other than throwing you into jail. Until about 5 or 6 years ago, they were actually, or 7 years ago, they would also shoot people who stood out of the line. Ranting, who used to be a good friend of mine, paid with his life. That doesn't seem to be happening anymore these days. However, the incomprehension turns into anger and turns into eventually into human rights violations and injustice and imprisonment and so on and so forth. I have to say that I'm optimistic about where Turkey is going. When you look at what happened in the last 10 years, when you look at what happened in the last 30 years, this country has become a much better place to live in. It's not because of this politician or that politician, it's simply the sociological composition of the country is changing. Turkey is no longer, it can no longer be ruled by the ideas and notions of the 1920s. It just doesn't hold it anymore. However, the establishment is waging a long-range battle to just keep the status quo as it is, to maintain the habits and the patterns of the old republic of the 20th century. I don't think they stand a chance, though. In the long run, we will win this battle.